Thank you very much. Just trying to make these slides move forwards. That would be, oh, here we go. Okay, so that's your housekeeping from CIWEM. So thank you very much for having me. My name is Kate Lemon and I work for Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and I have done for a few years now. Lots of fun, lots of projects going on. My job title has just changed again, but I still look after the Trent and Erewash regions, which is about the sort of lower third of Derbyshire. So I look after the team that, there's two teams that look after the nature reserve. So it sounds grand, there's actually 3 members of staff in total. So it's all very hands-on, very busy. And one of the projects that we've been involved in, and I did a presentation for CIWEM last year, was the Beaver Reintroduction that we did at Willington Wetlands. So we're just going to do an update on that today. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the project or familiar with beavers, or even were able to attend the talk last year. So I'll do a little bit of a recap. There'll be lots of opportunity for questions. I think Casey and Barbara are managing the chat, and there's a Q&A. I think the easiest way is if you have any questions to put them in the Q&A rather than the chat facility. And we'll try and pick them up at the end. I won't see them as I'm talking, but they'll be monitoring them for me. So a little map of the county here, and all those different numbered dots are our nature reserves. In fact, there's even more than showing on that map now. We just seem to be getting more and more all the time, or buying land or expanding our reach, which is really exciting. So we're looking at the south of the county, to Willington Wetlands Nature Reserve. Sits in the Trent Valley. You can see it there, it's number 39, right on the edge of Derbyshire and Staffordshire, right next to the River Trent, literally about 200 metres away from the River Trent. It's a site that we've owned for many years. We purchased it in 2005, so we've had it a good long time now. And it's next gravel pits. Probably not the best restored for wildlife, but certainly not the worst. I think gravel pits now and aggregate companies are much more aware about land going back to wildlife and the work that can be done as they're working a site, as they're finishing a site, and as they're effectively restoring it. We did do an awful lot of work in the first 4 or 5 years with big machines, trying to lose those very steep edges you find in gravel pits. They're like big baths that have been dug into the ground, trying to create the marginal vegetation and room for it, islands, so we can attract species that will only nest or live where they can't be predated. It was already a very special site for wildlife, and we'd like to think that we've made it better for that. So it was the site that we chose to release beavers. We're very keen to bring beavers back into the county. They've been absent from Derbyshire for 800 years. They've been absent from most of England for 400 years. And as you're probably well aware, there's been a number of releases. Probably in the last 4 to 5 years, there's been a significant amount of releases, multiple releases in counties across England. I have to remember not to mention the UK. I'm talking about England here. Scotland and Wales are very different. And I'm proud to say majority of these releases have been led by the wildlife trusts in each of those counties, and other high profile ones as well, like the Spain's Hall Estate ones or NEP. So why did we want the beavers at Willington? I've just outlined what a fantastic nature reserve it was already, how large it was and how keen we were to get hold of it. And we've been managing it for 17 years. So why do we suddenly want beavers? Well, it wasn't a sudden decision. It had been sort of looking at natural flood management or nature-based solutions for quite some time, and beavers kept sort of popping up, and they were becoming more popular as a tool. People were starting to realize that some of the horror stories about beavers simply aren't true, and actually for a fairly unassuming quiet mammal that really would like the quiet life, they're actually incredibly effective. So I did a little comparison here of humans versus beavers in terms of site management. So I hope none of my volunteers are watching and they won't be too offended. But volunteers and staff and humans in terms of managing wetlands, trying to prevent succession from taking over We can see all this lovely willow in that picture on the left of where it's trying to spread into this beautiful fen edge that goes into the water. We're trying to establish reed beds at Willington, and the willow just seems to want to do its best to get in there and take over. Humans are relatively slow. They get tired despite giving them lots of tea and biscuits. It's quite repetitive and boring work. In fact, as you'll know from clearing willow, it isn't even just a case of it's repetitive and boring doing that piece of willow. You'll be going back to it for a number of years. It doesn't matter how much Roundup you throw at it, bloody stuff always still grows back. Very annoying. We very much rely on power tools, which of course are fossil fuel. I know there are battery-powered chainsaws and brush cutters available now. We have a number of them here at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. They still need charging. The batteries still run out. They're not foolproof. No matter how random we like to think that we work, we don't. So humans approach things in a very structured, orderly way, and it doesn't matter whether it's grassland management, wetlands, woodlands, we tend to do things in blocks or clumps. It's not really terribly natural. Doesn't really have the diverse effect that we want on the age structure or the height structure or the variety of vegetation. We tend to sort of go in and clear fell a bit and go, oh, that looks good, and walk away. We don't float very well. We don't really get around in wetlands awfully well. We do sink, and that gets us tired and fed up, and morale plummets. And again, using these noisy power tools or having a large group of people crashing around in the undergrowth, there's a lot of disturbance, lots of localised disturbance, which in some sites you could say, well, it's only for a few days. And other sites, you know, that really could be for quite a long period of time. What do we do with the cuttings? That's a perennial problem with willow. If you're not careful, you are just going to create lots of bits on the ground that are going to sprout and regrow, or they'll wash downstream and annoy somebody else, or you have a great big bonfire, which also doesn't really sit terribly well when you're trying to think about your carbon footprint. The other thing is we are torn between a number of sites. So the previous map showed 43 nature reserves. At the moment, I think the last count, we're on 46 nature reserves in Derbyshire. Every organisation is the same. We are non-government funded charities with bare minimum staff, volunteers supporting us. We are spread very thin. So the benefit of the beavers is that they do everything that we need doing, and they do it for free. They're experts. They know what they're doing. They don't struggle to get around in the wet areas. They don't cause lots of noise and kerfuffle and disturbance. They have the most brilliant method of controlling the cuttings and getting rid of them because they eat them. They strip all of the bark off the branches that they cut down, so they can't regrow. They want to get to the cambium underneath the bark, and those branches that they bring down, the trees, the material, it all gets consumed. They're very cheap to run. Fencing's quite expensive. The beavers themselves are remarkably good value for money. They also regenerate. So when your tools break down and you need to buy new ones, beavers will naturally have kits each year and keep expanding the workforce quite happily for you. They don't really have much of a wanderlust. So although we do have to put them in enclosures still, they're not that keen to go anywhere else. Once they've got a good spot, they will happily stay there and make it their home. They've got their territory, they're well established. And they target all vegetation. They will eat anything, and I mean literally anything. They've got things that they prefer, which you'd almost think is funny, really, considering that they're wetland species and they like wetland trees and they like wetland plants, but they really will eat anything as well. So they're having a positive impact on all of the vegetation. So just a very quick recap on beavers and why they're special. So they're a keystone species, and that's a really important word to remember, because it doesn't just mean that they're top of the tree. They're not top of the pyramid. They're not some high level apex predator. Keystone means that they actually are the cornerstone, the keystone to a habitat, to an ecological unit. So their presence has a profound effect. They change areas. They don't just go and live there. They actually change it. They're constantly working. They're constantly adapting. The saying, busy as a beaver, is very true. They create habitat. They manage habitat. They have a knock-on effect totally unaware of it themselves, but they have this incredible knock-on effect for every other single species. And we also know now that they have a knock-on effect to all sorts of other natural processes too. So they will create habitat, they will maintain habitat, they'll adapt it, they'll change it, and it's all positive, it's all good. The other key thing to remember about beavers is they're vegetarian. In fact, they're vegan. They're not just vegetarian, they're vegan because they don't eat eggs or honey. And they do not eat fish, and they have incredible benefits for fish by creating quite complex underwater structures from branches and material that create refuge for the fish. So there is some interesting thoughts still around beaver dams and the effects they have on streams and rivers and fish migration. I would say that they have a lot less impact than the man-made structures that we're busy trying to take out of rivers now, the dams and the weirs and the sluices and the control systems. And as clever as beavers are at building dams, and they are, it's really incredible what they can do. They haven't yet mastered using waterproof materials. So their dams are not foolproof. They leak, they allow water to spread through them. They also don't tend to be so huge that a fish can't get over it. So that's just a quick recap, really. So I mentioned that they eat all plant species, and it's been really interesting a year of having beavers. So the 27th of September was our first release anniversary this year. Excuse me. And I'll talk through some of the tracks and signs and how we've monitored the beavers and how we've seen their effects. What was really interesting was for the first few weeks, maybe a month or so, we really started to worry that we actually had some beavers still on site, because we just didn't see any signs of them at all. So all the classic, they'll come in, they'll fell all the trees, they'll chew everything down. We were so glad the day that we actually started to see signs of them nibbling on something, because it meant they were still there. We were starting to get a little bit nervous. But as I mentioned before, the key thing they're after, large mammals that live on cellulose, pretty impressive to attain the size and weight that they do and the strength they have. And that's because the key bit they want under the tree bark is the cambium, where the nutrients are and where the water flows. And that's where they can get their nutrient source from. They don't necessarily kill the trees. We had a wonderful representative from the NFU came along to one of the, we represented the environment and climate on the COP26 for BBC News 24. And she just sort of stood on our site and said, well, this is ridiculous. We've spent millions planting trees. They're going to eat all the trees. And it was almost so jaw-droppingly wrong that you couldn't almost respond. They're not stupid. They don't eat trees. They farm trees. They farm plants, just the same that humans like to. And the pictures on the bottom 3 pictures are all evidence of beavers on either our sites or on other people's sites. Sometimes they'll knock down a whole tree. More often than not, they are browsing, they are grazing, and the tree species they particularly like, willow and alder, will regenerate. And it's almost like the trees have responded to centuries of being predated, and this is their response mechanism. They create a lot of woody debris in the wetland habitats as well, which has a relatively short-lived life. Again, you're not talking about huge amounts of material building up and causing problems, flooding or floating off downstream. But as part of that life cycle, there's a huge amount of invertebrates that are supported by that as well. And of course, they are the building blocks of all the food chains, really, in the natural environment. And then by the trees being stimulated to put a lot more growth on, or to protect themselves, or to regrow bark, or to regenerate from the base, we now know that trees sequester more carbon in that first 75 years of growth than at any other time in their life cycle. So actually having lots of new trees or old trees that are regenerating, so effectively coppicing or pollarding them, is incredibly useful for carbon sequestration as well. A little bit of science about the beavers. My goodness, there is some science about the beavers as well now. Absolutely incredible. The papers that are out there across Europe, papers that are now coming from the UK. We're doing a lot of research ourselves. And I really like this because it shows 2 of the key things that beaver dams achieve. And this is a really great example of the beavers don't set out to control silt or water flow. They just feel safe in slow, deep water. They don't know, they haven't got any natural predators in England. Their predators in the wild would be species such as wolf, mountain lion, bear. We don't have any of those in England yet. I'm going to release those maybe next year or the year after. But the beavers feel safe in that slow, deep water. So that's one of the main reasons they build dams. And of course, the dams create pools, and they create, you can imagine a flight of canal locks. They'll create a series of pools up a waterway, up a stream, a brook, or a small river to hold water. And each of those pools then acts as a filtration system. Those lovely leaky barriers that we've been busy putting into waterways with our chainsaws, the beavers doing it themselves, they help filter that sediment. And you can see the graph there, the suspended sediment above and below, and the example with the water colour. And also the flow of water as well. They help iron out those peaks and troughs. So in England this year, we've had an incredibly dry summer, absolutely bone dry in places, reservoirs at rock bottom, drought orders in place. And now in November, it feels like we all need to be building an ark. Here in Derbyshire, it has just rained solidly. We've got so much flooding, the land is saturated. But by having these dams, and again, by having this flight of locks, as it were, you can see the red line on the graph, that is the flow. So the flow is being ironed out. We're not ending up with these huge peaks and these huge troughs. And of course, water is the basis of life for everything. So keeping water in landscapes for longer, preventing huge surges downstream, which cause problems, preventing droughts can only ever be a good thing. Wetlands are one of the best ways of sequestering carbon. The most efficient method of sequestering carbon is having an ocean or a sea. We don't have many of those in Derbyshire, but we do have lots of water. So keeping more water in landscapes, having these active carbon sinks and having these healthy carbon sinks that equally aren't just capturing carbon dioxide and processing it, they're releasing oxygen as well, can only ever be a good thing. So let's recap on what we had. We had 4 beavers come to Derbyshire. So the licence that we had from Natural England stated that we could have 2 beaver families. So confusingly, a collective noun for beavers is a family. So even if you've only got 2, that's called a family. Everyone always imagines that we've got mum, dad and some kids, but a family is more than 1 beaver, basically. And we had them in 2 pairs. None of our beavers had met each other before. And this got picked up by the media quite a bit because I foolishly said in one interview it was like a beaver dating agency. I regret saying that, but it was. We had these adult male and female trapped from Scotland. They were trapped from an area where they were raiding local farmers' carrots. The farmer didn't want them there, and they were brought down and paired up and released. And then we did the same again 10 days later. We had an adult male, adult female that needed new homes, and we released them together. So they had to be released separately to allow them to establish their territories. Once we'd released the first pair, we couldn't release the second pair in the same place because that was then deemed to be an established beaver territory. But thankfully we got a nice big site, plenty of habitat. That wasn't a problem. The 10 days was as much to give the first ones a chance to settle in, as well as coordinating the second pair that were coming from somewhere else. It's quite easy to release beavers. The tricky bit is doing the fencing and getting all your permits. The easy bit is contacting the Beaver Trust, ordering your beavers and opening the cage when they come. And you can see from the photos we were blessed with absolutely stunning weather, beautiful conditions, and 4 absolutely stunning adult beavers. And we knew they were big, and we were prepared, and we had to pick the crates up and carry them from the van, put them on the Land Rover and trailer, take them to the water's edge. But gosh, that moment when we opened those trap doors and let them out was just, everyone was just speechless, absolutely stunning. So I mentioned that to start off with, we didn't know we had beavers on site. We got all this expensive fencing, we'd have culverts put in, water gates, and we really genuinely started to get a little bit nervous that we just weren't seeing signs of them. We were waiting for the trees to come down. We're waiting for all these amazing tracks and signs that you should see. And we realized that we were starting to get little tracks like this through some of the wet ditches and around the edges of the wet grassland and the marsh edges, the fen edges. And this is a classic beaver track. This is what they do. They like to move through water. So they don't really feel comfortable on land. And to be fair to them, as much as I love them, they are not built for land travel. They're heavy, they're cumbersome, their tails drag. They've got these great big webbed feet. So it's like walking in swimming flippers. And they've got these little tiny front paws that they end up putting down for balance, but aren't really built for land travel. So they like to move through the water, and this is when we started to realise that we'd got them. And here is an example of exactly one of our beavers doing exactly that, just pushing their way. They're like little bulldozers. If they want to go through some vegetation to keep their feet wet and to keep in the water, they will. A little bit of reed or rush is not going to stop them. They will barge their way through quite happily. Then the site started to get muddy in the winter, which was great because that's when we started to find footprints, and this was really fun. And you can see the size of the footprints. So the padlock on the left for scale is probably about 2 to 3 inches in height, that padlock. So that's, you know, a 6-inch high beaver foot there, and that's a back foot. You can see the large back foot, and you can see the sort of webbed shape it's given. The central slide is nice because we've got front and back feet in the mud, so we can see the big webbed back feet. We can see them going forwards, backwards, sideways, and then you can see the smaller handprints where they put the front paws down for balance. We discovered that beavers are quite creatures of habit, and they come out at a very similar time every evening, and they walk a very similar route. They reminded me a lot of badgers. The badgers have very similar traits where they like to have a set route that they follow, and a set path where they go to feed or go to a latrine or go to water or play or groom. And the beavers are just the same, and this made monitoring them really quite easy because we were able to work out pretty quickly where the signs of activity were. Beaver poo is very unusual to find. So beavers defecate in water as they're swimming. So it's very unusual to find beaver poo. So we were quite excited, as most ecologists are when they find poo. They were quite excited to find some beaver poo. This is probably only the second, I think, well, this was the first pile of beaver poo we found. And then honestly, in 12 months, I think I've seen piles of beaver poo, possibly twice more. So it really is very unusual to see. This is when one of them had been trying to eat one of the tunnelized fence posts. So their poop is not normally this light in colour, I've been told. This is because it was eating tunnelized pine. But, you know, it made it easy for us to find it anyway. And then we realised that these beavers were really, really busy, and they were moving around the sites, and we were starting to get a lot of footage on the trail cameras. So we have a dozen trail cameras. At any one time, we could easily have half a dozen trail cameras out. To start off with, we were just sticking them out where there were footprints, where there were runs through the water, and then we started to see where they were starting to eat as well. So we could put the cameras out, and we got very good at getting some really lovely footage from them by working out where they were coming out, where they were eating, where to put the camera, where to get the best views, how long to set the videos to run for when they're triggered. So that was really great. So you can see all these pictures. These are all from our reserve. I've tried to use as many beaver photos from Willington as possible in this presentation. The top left-hand picture, and these are all absolutely classic signs of beaver. So these are the things that are unmistakable. So that branch on the top left that they've laid daintily across a little bit of typha there, with that cut at the bottom end, beavers have these huge 3-inch chisel-like razor-sharp teeth, and they cut down at a very classic 45-degree angle when they're felling, and they cut across it, and you'll get these very distinct grooves where the teeth go. So it's very unique. There's nothing else cuts trees down like that as well. Even the nibbling on the piece of willow you can see in the middle there, actually, that again is very, very unique to the beavers, the shaping, the grooving. And this is very different to how deer or even sheep will nibble trees. They're trying to get to that cambium, they're trying to get underneath the bark and find the best bits. Lovely collection of beaver twigs on the right hand side. Whenever we do walks around the reserve and we go sort of behind the scenes, everybody always comes out with a beaver stick because there's loads of them, and again they're absolutely unique in the fact that beavers will sit there on their back legs and they will rotate the branches like a corn on the cob. So if you can imagine your archetypical, you know, a chipmunk cartoon eating a piece of corn on the cob, that's just how the beavers are. They're absolute machines when they're eating. They are so efficient, they're so focused. As I mentioned, yeah, they're large animals. They can be 25 kilos an adult, living on plant matter, so they do have to eat quite a lot. The bottom picture is a still taken from one of our cameras, and you can see in the background the willow that it's been busy coppicing. Pull the material down, and then one of the main reasons that they like to get the trees is they're trying to get at the brushy stuff at the top. So they will use branches and sticks and logs to create dams or their lodges, but also the best bit, the best eating, the fresh vegetation, where there's the most nutrients and water, and where there's the most sort of tasty fresh bits are at the top of the tree. And that's why they fell them, to knock them down. So these are all pictures from around the reserve, and these are all different examples of different size stuff where they've been nibbling away. The top left-hand picture was the very first tree that we saw evidence on, and it's on a corner, so that became known as Doomed Willow Corner, because that we knew that willow was doomed. We knew that the beavers had it in for it, and it was great fun going and seeing what they'd done overnight, where the material was being moved to. They were dragging it around, they were taking it off to make food caches, and now of course they've spread around the reserve. So I tried to get a selection of images to show the different things they've done. Bottom right is when they like to go into the reed beds, and they love the small stuff in the reed beds, which makes me very happy, because we've spent a lot of time and effort trying to target the small willow in the reed beds to try and hold that succession and keep the reed beds in the best quality. Thicker areas of willow carr, where they've come in and they've felled some of the big bits, some of the small bits. And they're great at just knocking that vegetation down. And like I say, they found a brilliant way to prevent all the material that they knock down from regrowing by stripping the bark off it. Or sometimes they don't. So if you look closely on both of those bottom left and bottom middle pictures, you can see that the willow is doing its best, despite the fact it's been knocked down or even cut off completely. It's doing its best to regrow. Yeah, sorry. Somebody just locking up the office there. So it's done its best to regrow. Well, of course, the beavers think that's wonderful, because they've now got food at mouth level on this willow. But look at the light it's let in. Look at the diversity it's built there as well. Those stumps will regenerate. They'll start regrowing. They'll start absorbing carbon. It's that cycle all over again. It was quite a while before our beavers started attacking anything bigger, really, than about 6-8 inches diameter across, and we did wonder if they were ever going to look at any of the bigger trees, and they have started to now. And again, what's really interesting is the way they fell these trees. So they really take their time, and they don't come in and fell it down overnight. They work at it. They'll work at it over the course of a week or so. They'll come and have an hour or so nibbling on it. I guess it's quite hard work. There's not really much food being generated, so you're burning energy. You need to refill that energy back up. So they'll take their time over it. One of our volunteers always makes me laugh, because he says the beavers are rubbish at felling trees because their directional cuts are always in the wrong place, because the trees fall into the water. And I said to him, well, that's because they want them in the water. We try and fell trees onto the land because it's easier to process them. The beavers are much more comfortable in water, but they'll have a go at a tree, they'll nibble away at it, and then they'll just go away and leave it. And eventually that tree will probably fall down, and the beavers think this is wonderful. And we've got some beautiful footage where we've recorded areas where we've had quite dense willow carve. For example, the middle photo there, where it's very dark, it's very dank, there's very little vegetation underneath at the edge of the water. It's all a bit sedimenty and silty. It's all a bit, lots of old rotten leaves. It's not really very pleasant. And they've knocked down branches, they've knocked down some trees, they've let the light in, and we're seeing this huge amount of ground flora regenerating. We're seeing species using these branches and trees in the water that you wouldn't imagine would like them, but they do. They think it's wonderful. They're finding that it's a safe refuge. They're feeding there. We've got kingfisher perching on them. We've got otter coming up and playing on them. And again, if you imagine what's happening under the water with the branches, that's creating refuge for fish, for small mammals, for invertebrates. So we've gone from a fairly sterile, dank, not very botanically interesting waterside edge to suddenly having so much diversity, just because the beavers were hungry. Dams, beaver dams. I forgot to put a title on this slide. I must admit, I was looking forward to the beavers building dams, but we didn't know if they would at Willington. As I mentioned earlier, they like deep, still water, makes them feel safe. Well, we have old gravel pits there. We have approximately 12 hectares of open water that's very deep and very still. So there was no need for them to build a dam as such. And there is one brook that runs through the reserve, and they just didn't really seem interested in this brook. We found very little signs of feeding, or tracks or trails, or even them walking along it. We found them walking across it at certain points to get from one pool to another. They didn't really seem particularly interested in this brook, and it does dry out in the summer. You can probably just make out the Himalayan balsam, the bright green stuff on that bottom left-hand slide. That's a slide in the summer, but the brook dries up completely, and what we mostly get in there is nettles and thistles and balsam. And then we realised just before the first anniversary that they'd made their first dam. We were really, really excited. And they've made a series of dams along this brook now. And we don't know whether it's in response to this brook drying up completely with us having such a dry summer, or they've just finally decided they wanted to. I don't know, but it's wonderful that they have. And as expected, it's not a huge dam. We're not talking about 60 foot high here and going to cause huge problems downstream because they've stopped all the water, or equally some people think they flood areas because they build dams. They are, excuse the pun, literally damned if they do, damned if they don't with some people. They either cut off water supplies or they flood places, but they don't. They build dams of the size that are appropriate to where they are. So yes, if you saw a river in Canada, they would build a dam across the whole river, but we're talking about a brook in Derbyshire that's probably about 6 foot wide at its widest, and probably attains a depth of about 1 to 2 meters. These lovely little dams. The top one is very much a stick dam, and leaves and twigs and all sorts of things have been poked in there. The smaller one, we realise that they've actually made it out of mud as well, and they've actually almost reinforced the woody material. And if you look closely, I'm not sure how easy it is to see, there's lots of front paw prints there where they've literally got handfuls of the mud and scooped it up and squished it into place. Absolutely fantastic. So I mentioned that we've been keeping tabs on our beavers, and we certainly have, and right from the start. And in fact, before the beavers came, we knew that we really wanted to see what these beavers were doing, and we wanted to prove or disprove some of the theories around them. We had some fairly negative comments made about our beaver release plans, people predicting doom and gloom. So, fairly determined from the word go to decide, well, we're going to prove or disprove this to people. But one way or another, you can't argue with science, you can't argue with facts. So we have a couple of fantastic volunteers who have just made all of this possible. Incredibly talented videographer and software engineer partnership, which is just a beautiful marriage of skills, and also very passionate about wildlife and live near Willington and quite happy to spend a lot of time going backwards and forwards, swapping the trail cameras around, working out the best angles, analysing the footage, changing the batteries, changing the SD cards, even down to working out how often they should be triggered and how long the video should run for when it is triggered, what's the reset period. What we wanted to do was record the effect of the beavers, and one of the very things we were very determined to do was have one of those slidey bars where you can move it across and go, oh, this is before and this is during and this is after. And that's exactly what we've been able to do. So every month they fly a drone, they get these incredible aerial footage images, which are then stitched together so they're all the same size and shape and scale to make this beautiful aerial map of the whole reserve, and we can see the difference. And this is how we spotted doomed willow was getting nibbled at, because we saw it on the cameras. We could see the difference between a dense clump of willow in September and then there we go, that was November 21. We're able to see that this is looking like it's a bit open, like something's been going on here. We've maybe got some tracks or runs coming into it as well. We've been doing fixed point photography. And that is from set points. Beavers have found these set points. This is some more of the tunnelized timber. They thought it was funny to try and eat. But this is as simple as having a post in the ground that's labeled, and that is our fixed photography point. And every time an image is taken, it's taken from the same point, same direction, same conditions. So we have the comparison in place. We try and have as little difference in place as possible so we can really see them. Andrew, one of our volunteers, is a software engineer, so he's now written apps. Every time a camera goes out, its location is recorded straight away. When we get the SD card back, we can identify it immediately from which camera it came from. Any footage on that is triaged, and obviously we do get endless rustling, waving reeds. We've got much better at avoiding that sort of footage. It might be a coot walking past, or we've had field mice and bank voles. I've had all sorts of fun stuff that we've picked up that haven't been beavers, but that's great because that's also lots of data, lots of species recording. The footage is triaged. Anything of any interest is then uploaded. So we have a permanent server, a cloud-based server that records all our footage. It's all carefully stored. It's all has a very strict library system, so it's there, it's secure, we can access it whenever we need it. And then also for the species identification, this has been a lovely piece of citizen science where we have 4 or 5 people that when the triaged footage is uploaded, they don't need the SD card, the footage is up there on the cloud. They can download sections at a time and they can sit there in their own time and they can identify the species. And we have a scoring system, so they can say how confident they are in the scoring. Anything that they're not confident in then goes through to somebody else. So we have checks in place to make sure that they are actually saying what they're seeing is what they actually have seen. We're working with assorted species groups to help classify species such as birds. So when you've got something just flitting past, you're not sure whether it's a magpie or a blackbird or a heron or whatever, it's just shot past. Then we're working with Derbyshire Ornithological Society as well. And all of this is built up to a bespoke website. So the links I've given to Barbara, they should be going in the chat, but also it's up there as well. So it's just basically Beaver Map. Just search for Beaver Map. There's nothing else quite like it. It's totally interactive. Top left-hand corner, all of these little things have an arrow. Click on that, takes you through. There's videos, there's data. You can click on a square on the map and pull up information for that. You can play with the slidey bar and look at all the different months of footage and the changes. We're now even looking into getting software so we can actually make all of the images, the drone images, the same colour, so we can iron out the differences through seasonality as well. You can see, for example, the September one, it was a very sunny day, there's a lot of shadow. We want to be able to iron out that as well, so we can try and have as much clarity there to compare as well. One of the latest things we've done is created a sightings app, which is all about public engagement. So this is accessed via a QR code. These are on each of our 3 platforms, and we have a bird hide at the reserve as well. So people can stand there, they can scan the QR code, it takes them straight through. It's web-based, so there's no app in terms of downloading anything onto your phone. Yeah, sorry, I'm just on a pause. Sorry, somebody else leaving the office. They access it, it's web-based, so they don't need to have any apps cluttering up their phone. They can just fill it in there and then. And there's 2 ways they can record the sightings. They can either do, effectively it's a fixed point photography, or they can do what we call the 5-minute count. The arrows seem to have moved here slightly, where it says 2 options. So they can just record the sightings from where they're stood, or they can stand there for 5 minutes and they can record everything they see for those 5 minutes. All the data automatically goes back up to us, to Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. We host the Biological Records Centre for the county. So these are all valid records. Something else that the Point Sightings app has is that you can take a snapshot of where you're stood, and you can actually tap on your screen when you've got the snapshot and say what you've seen. So it's not just a case of what I'm looking at from this point. You can actually say there, there's a snipe on the other side of the pool, there's a moorhen on the water, there's a blackbird in the bush next to me. It's just great. All of this is building up information on the website. All of this is building up information for people to look at. It's all about trying to inspire people to come to the reserve and enjoy it, but also to get involved and to help us with that recording of data as well. This is just for Willington at the moment. We are in the process of expanding it onto other nature reserves as well. And in fact, our 2 volunteers have been able to set up their own business now, and are now in partnership working with Derby City Council. You may know that we're working on rewilding Alistree Park, which is an 800-hectare green space on the edge of Derby City, and there'll be a lot of changes taking place from what was an amenity grassland municipal park and golf course to becoming the first major urban rewilding site. Just a little bit of information again, you can see how all this information feeds back, how easy it is to use. Even I've used it, so I'm sort of the guinea pig in terms of being the most technologically useless person ever. Even I've been able to go out on the reserve and stand there and tap, tap, tap and record things. So I think it's fantastic. So what next? Gosh. We basically have 2 members of staff and 3 or 4 fantastic volunteers. So there's a huge amount we could do, but we can't because there just aren't enough hours in the day. And we have, between the Trent and Erewash region, we have nearly 20 nature reserves, multiple projects, our own conservation farm, and lives to lead outside of work as well. So we do what we can do. One of the things we're setting up at the moment, and this is the picture in the top right-hand corner, is one of the islands at the reserve. We're setting up a live streaming platform. We've got fantastic donation of scaffolding materials from a local builder who was really excited to help. And our boat was also sponsored by somebody, so we put their logo, their sticker on that as well, Atlantic Pumps, who very appropriately make pumps for gravel pits to move water around to the right place. And this live streaming is going to be free of charge. It's going to be available via our website. We do something very similar already with a peregrine population on Derby City Cathedral. We're also working with the NHS as well. So we're working at Royal Derby. We've done videos for them to show on the TV screens for patients, inpatients, and also in outpatient waiting rooms. We've put videos together to do a virtual reality headset So you can now wear this virtual reality headset and see Willington from beaver's eye point of view. So we've gone out with waterproof cameras and had quite a lot of fun going through the bushes and the reeds and the aquatic edges and diving and even trying to find the entrance to their lodges or where they're living. School visits is something that we try and facilitate wherever possible. Ecotourism is going to become a huge thing, and I think if we're going to show people that you can make a living out of wildlife and therefore you don't perhaps need to carry on with the same industry or activities that you traditionally have on land, then this is really important that we show to people. This is an example of our beaver watching spot, quite simple, but it works, and we will be expanding the offering with that. We've done some test sessions with different audiences. Every single session just gets booked up. Everybody is just interested in the beavers and the chance to see them as well, which of course is super cool. This is an example of some artwork we've had done for some interpretation. I'm working on a project at the moment where we're purchasing an adjacent field. We've popped a bridge over the brook adjacent to the reserve and creating a 5-mile wider landscape walk around the area, bringing people in, bringing tourists into the village, supporting local businesses and just providing that access and enjoyment for people. We offer ecology training days for consultants and professionals. We're running 2 next year already with the Species Recovery Trust. Again, I think the link for that is going to go in the chat. So do look at the Species Recovery Trust. They offer an incredible array of training anyway, and it's all what I like to call real training, in that it's delivered by people that do this and can talk about real sites and real examples and take you out to see them. We offer bespoke training as well for individual consultancies or individual groups. That can all be arranged as well. We work with a lot of education establishments already, notably Trent University and Derby University, supporting students through BSc, MSc, PhD, all levels, coming and doing research and study on the beavers, on the reserve, the effects of them. More technology, there's loads more clever apps that Andrew's developing, clever ways to bring the beavers to people who can't get to the site, clever ways to engage people on the site. And then newsflash, I must be mad. We're thinking of doing it all over again and looking into doing a second release in Derbyshire. Very early stages at the moment, putting together the costings, putting together a bid for the funding for it. But yeah, you know, having seen what fantastic land managers they are, and the effect they can have, just these, you know, 4 animals in a huge site, has brought every bit of theory to life, and I am fully signed up now that they really are the way forwards for wetland management. So that's me. So that's quite a lot of talk. Thank you for bearing with me throughout all of that. Any questions?
Thanks for that, Kate. That was a really interesting talk, and it was great to see all the pictures as well of all the beavers doing their thing. So yeah, we have got a few questions, so I'll start going through them. First one is from Denise, who says, I know that beavers enjoy non-native species. Will they eat pennywort?
Yes, I will say they will, because they eat Japanese knotweed, they eat Himalayan balsam. I might see if ours can eat some crassula. Yeah, I'm sure they will. There doesn't seem to be anything they don't eat. And what was really interesting was throughout the summer, we got a bit nervous in spring because they stopped eating so many trees and willows and going into the reed beds, and we didn't see the signs of them as much. And again, it made us a bit nervous that they weren't there. But they were, and what they were doing is they were just enjoying all the other aquatic vegetation on offer, and the fresh roots in the reed beds and the typha and water lilies, and you name it, they eat it. I can't guarantee they will target it. I don't, you know, they're not going to be, I couldn't market them as a solution for one specific species unless you have a big willow problem. But perhaps what they will do is change the environment that the pennywort is growing in. So, you know, for example, with crassula that that likes those aquatic margins, whether they can change water levels or whether they will allow more light in, which obviously isn't the Himalayan balsam doesn't like. Who knows? You could get some beavers and try it and let us know. That would be good.
Okay. Next question, are beavers a protected species in England?
They are now, yes. So there was consultation last November about what everybody thought about beavers. Overwhelming response. I don't think the government quite expected so many responses. So all the dates they gave for when the report would be published and the findings shown all got missed massively. In fact, the full findings still haven't really been published. There's been some snippets, short bits of it. But yes, one of the upshots was that they were declared a native species at the beginning of October this year, which is really exciting. The main change for us meant that we were now had a native species in an enclosure rather than a non-native species. The terms of our licence from Natural England, however, didn't change in that we still have to keep our beavers captive for up to 5 years. That's the terms of the license. Until that changes, we have to abide by those rules. So the fences still have to stay, the culverts, the water gates, whatever. I don't mind that because there's a lot of time and effort and money to get those beavers and they're doing a really good job. So selfishly, I don't really want them to go anywhere else yet because they've got a bit more work to do at Willington. But yes, it has meant that that having beavers now, and of course there are wild beavers in the UK, sorry, in England. We have got beavers that aren't part of any enclosure, that have come from wild populations, have spread, or people don't know where they've come from. They aren't chipped, they aren't identifiable as somebody that have escaped. It now means that those species are safe, they are protected. Apologies if anybody works for Natural England, but it's sort of in true Natural England form. As soon as a species is declared protected, there has to be, it seems, some control methods put in for somebody who might decide that protected species actually is a problem. So that is still being worked up. People are sort of saying, well, what do we do if beavers are a problem? I should point out that culling them is an absolute last resort and needs to be a last resort or not even on the table. You know, there are ways of controlling the effects of beavers. The Beaver Trust have done a huge amount of work and still do on mitigation, on working with landowners, on reducing the negative effects of beavers, and translocation is still an option as well.
Okay, that kind of brings me on to the next question then. So this is from Victor, that if there are no natural predators for beavers at the moment, is there a chance that they'll overpopulate in the future?
It's very unlikely because they're a keystone species. They like quite large territories. They are very sociable in their family groups, but outside of their family groups, they are not sociable at all, and they will push other species, other beavers away from them. They're the world's second largest rodent. They're Europe's largest rodent, and I think people therefore sometimes think they breed like rodents, like rats or rabbits, and they absolutely don't. They will only have one litter a year. They'll live in family groups, and very similar to wolves or badgers, you tend to find that there's only one breeding pair in that family group. So you've almost got the alpha male and the alpha female. They'll have between 2 and 4 kits a year. Those kits are not sexually mature until they're at least 2. And in fact, they will live in extended family groups for many, many years without breeding. So the maths doesn't follow that 2 becomes 4, becomes 6, becomes 8, becomes 722 in a couple of years' time. They don't breed like that. They will quite happily go and live in bachelor groups. They will quite happily live in sociable groups where they aren't necessarily breeding. Again, very similar to badgers. And I think the badger vaccination programme that Derbyshire Wildlife Trust has led on, and we are the leader for the country. That was really illuminating when people were thinking, gosh, there's a huge badger set. There must be 15 badgers in there. And we tracked them to vaccinate them, and it turned out there were 4. You know, the population isn't as big as people think. So no, overpopulation is not going to be a concern anytime in the next century.
Okay. And again, that kind of brings me on to the next question about how will inbreeding be managed in the future, if that's an issue.
So all the beavers that have been released are by the Beaver Trust releases, translocates beavers, takes beavers from one place to another. Every beaver that is caught before it is moved has to undergo a series of health checks. They're identity chipped and they have bloods taken. And one of the reasons the bloods is taken is there's a beaver stud book being built up, and this is to prevent exactly that. This is to prevent beavers from same family groups being released and effectively put in a position where they could breed. So we are managing that. In the family groups, sorry, I probably forgot to say, our beavers had kits this year. You know, I don't think I even put that in the presentation. So one of our pairs had kits. They had 2 kits. Those kits will live with their parents until they're sexually mature, and very likely beyond that. Only the adult pair or the alpha pair will keep on breeding. They're monogamous, and they also mate for life. So it's very, very unlikely, and, you know, don't get me wrong, that they might prove me wrong. They're like people, you know, we tend to be monogamous and marry for life, but doesn't always stay the same. But it's very, very unlikely there'll be any inbreeding per se between families.
I've got a question here from Tamara. She says, amazing talk, thank you. What is the approximate area that the beavers will modify?
However much area you give them.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, some of the first releases, one of the first releases in North Devon was 2 hectares. Our release is 46 hectares. They have, you could say they have modified all of it. The Idle Valley in Nottinghamshire, that is nearer 50 hectares, 50, 60 hectares. Again, they are modifying all of it. So they will modify all of it, but similar to otters, for example, they can have quite a big range in that, you know, they're not modifying all of it all of the time. So we see lots of signs of feeding around our reserve. We can map where they've been, where they're going, what they're doing, but they're not active in every single bit of the 46 hectares all of the time, if that makes sense.
Okay. Question here from Alex. How would these beavers created leaky dams hold out in the period of significant flow? In certain catchments such as Greater Manchester, there's a lot of problems with woody debris blocking up debris screens. After a period of woody debris is held back, wouldn't a beaver dam bursting be a significant flood risk if they're left unattended and without their structures being checked?
Yeah, I think it depends how big their barrier is to start off with. So where have they built this barrier? You know, they're unlikely to build anything on main rivers, mainly because the main rivers in England are so busy. The structures you're talking about where debris is having to be cleared to prevent it building up to keep flowing, they're man-made structures. They're man-made structures that are designed to keep water flowing, to keep water, imagine, coming away from the centre of Manchester or moving it out into the countryside, preventing it from building up. So you're not going to get beavers on those man-made structures, really. There's nothing there for them. Sorry, was the second part of the question about a dam bursting and causing a flood event?
Yes, is there any risk of that? They could burst if they're left unattended without any structural check?
I think yes, but I think again, unlikely that you would see a dam burst and have a huge flooding risk. You've got to think about the size of the dams they're building, and there's some really interesting research out there, and I would definitely say, you know, really do Google beaver dams in Europe. The Bavarian beavers have been heavily studied in Cyprus, in Italy, you know, the beavers in North America and Canada, up in the Scandinavian countries. They tend to build dams to the size they need, but they're not world dominators. They're not trying to build massive dams. They do a lot of maintenance on their dams. Their dams do get washed away. They do need to do maintenance on them. I think you would, if there was a dam that wasn't being maintained for any reason over a long period of time, it's more likely it would just gradually start to degrade naturally anyway. So I don't think you would ever see a huge flood incident because a beaver dam has given way. Plus the fact their dams are never fully waterproof to start off with. So that actually makes them stronger because the pressure of water isn't building up against a solid structure. But of course, it also helps that water movement throughout the landscape all of the time. And hopefully that answers the question.
Got an interesting question here. Is there a limit on how close they can be to tidal environments?
not that I know of. Wild Ken Hill have got them, and they are right on the coast of Norfolk, aren't they? So I don't think so. No.
One from Andy Warren here. Are there plans to introduce beavers elsewhere in Derbyshire in the near future? So I guess you've got your reintroduction for next year, but anywhere else in Derbyshire?
Yeah, so the reintroduction we're thinking of is another one of our sites. So in a way, it's an easy win. Now, I've got probably half a dozen sites up my arm, up my sleeve that I can't fence, absolutely totally impractical to fence. But the minute we get the fact that we can have wild releases, they are going to be top of my list to go and look at and talk to other landowners. There are other landowners that are very, very interested. We have got big family estates in Derbyshire working with Peak District National Park. They own a huge amount of land in Derbyshire as well. And of course we are, we've got 6 counties around us. So we're talking with all of the other counties. Cheshire have already released beavers, but there's commonality on the Cheshire-Derbyshire border. Again, similar, Lancashire, Yorkshire Wildlife Trust are very interested. Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust have already done 1 release, but again, there's areas where we actually, the river is the boundary, and we're looking at sites. Staffordshire Wildlife Trust would love beavers. They're interested in sites where we could work together. So yes, there's definitely an aspiration to look at other introductions in Derbyshire, either on our land or other people's. We have just gone out to advertise, do a bit of a recruitment drive here. So we've just been received some funding from Nature-Based Solution Climate Change Fund, and we are actually recruiting now for some nature recovery advisors and also for a beaver feasibility officer, because we want to know whether or not it is feasible. So rather than just assume it is, we like to test theories, we like to sort of check the science, we like to come up with an idea, but we like to test it and see whether or not it's valid. And if it isn't, that's absolutely fine. We'd rather know that, we'd rather have done it properly, gone through the due processes before just wading into something. So we're advertising now, and we're hoping to recruit very soon to get somebody to look specifically for beaver feasibility within the county, our land and others, but also that will be for other species reintroductions as well.
Excellent. Okay, Rebecca's asking, is there a national level strategy for from the Wildlife Trust, regarding beaver introductions? Are there any links between this project and the release in Cheshire? So I guess we've sort of touched on that a little bit.
Yes and no. You may or may not know that the Wildlife Trusts, there's 46 wildlife trusts plus the RSWT, or effectively the UK office, and we work as a federation, and we certainly have a lot of commonality, and we share a lot, and RSWT pulls together a lot of material and strands of work that apply to all the wildlife trusts, but equally we all work as our own entities as well. So yes, there is some sharing with Cheshire Wildlife Trust in that they got their beavers before us. So we went and had a chat with them about problems we're encountering, or how do we do this, or what's the best way of doing that. But equally, no, they're all standalone projects because we've had to enclose them. So they are all effectively ring fenced. We haven't been able to link them up yet. The aspiration, I suppose, would be that ultimately the watercourses that flow across the wider landscape become those conduits.
Okay, and are wild releases kind of on the cards in the future, or is everyone?
Who knows? Natural England haven't given us many clues on that one yet, so I would like to think it's inevitable, but who knows? We'll wait and see. So,
and then another question here from Peter. You mentioned that these beavers are from Scotland. Are they the same species that were wild in England all those years ago, or are they a different type of species?
Yeah, no, very good point. So there are two species of beaver in the world. You have the Canadian species, beaver, the canadensis, and then you have the European species. So the beavers that we have in England are the European species. Now, the first beavers that were discovered back in about 2001 living wild in Tayside, and bear in mind these were the first beavers that had been found in the UK in 400 years. They were caught and they were blood tested, and they were interestingly shown to have DNA genetic links to some of the remnant populations in Europe. So there were links to a Bavarian population, a Scandinavian population, and a Southern Europe population as well. So thankfully, the genetics are already very diverse. Which is very good from sort of an inbreeding or health point of view. But yes, you can only release European beaver in the UK at the moment. There will be no plans to release the Canadian species. They should live on the other side of the world. There is a very small population, I believe, in Scandinavia of them. I think that somebody thought they were doing a good thing in releasing beaver, but no, ideally we would just have the European ones.
And then a question here from Bruce. So you note that they eat Japanese knotweed. Is there any evidence that also spreads it as a result of leaving viable sections of uneaten food?
Personally, no experience. I've seen pictures of them sitting there eating a piece of Japanese knotweed. I mean, interestingly, when they eat, they tend to go to a food source and sit there and eat. They do make food caches. We have seen them, and we have got footage of them swimming across one of the pools with branches in their mouth. Only ever seen them doing this with willow, and they take a big branch and they dive down to the bottom, poke it in the mud, and they're almost making themselves a fridge. They're making themselves a food cache where it'll sit there and stay fresh. The interesting thing is that they don't need to do that because they don't hibernate. They're active all year round, and they can tolerate very, very cold temperatures. So it's not even like they don't want to come out of their lodge for the day. They just stay at home and eat. Don't know, be an interesting one, but I wouldn't have thought they would have been a particular vector for moving it, because they would probably sit and eat it in situ. So to some extent, is that much different to one of the methods of control, which is sort of pulling it and piling it? I mean, certainly you wouldn't expect anything to be viable once it passed through their digestive system. Yeah, don't know. Piece of research to be done there.
Okay. And then looks like last question. The beavers obviously enclosed at the moment. Will they ever be allowed into a wider environment?
I very much hope so. I very much hope we get to the point where we do not need to maintain the fences, whether that's at the point where we can do wild releases, or whether that's at the point where our license from Natural England expires and we're told that we don't need to maintain the fences. We can take out the culverts. What's interesting about the licenses that you're issued when you want to do a beaver release is that they're for 5 years, and nobody seems to want to talk about what you do at the end of the 5 years. So yes, I hope so. Otherwise we are going to have to catch them and make hats out of them all, which would be awful. Selfishly, as I said, I don't want them to escape yet. There's a big site there. They've got a lot of willow. They are just 12 months already having a really interesting effect on the reserve, and this will be the first real winter when we can see the effect they have on the reed beds as well. So we get a lot of flack from the bird watchers there that want to see these beautiful sterile reed beds with no willow in them, and they get very upset when they can see the willow coming, and they keep saying to us, are you going to go in and cut it down? And I keep saying, no. What is the point of having the beavers if we're going to go in there and cut down the willow ourselves? The whole point is we want to see if they will do it, and we want to see how the whole of the habitat works with a natural based solution. This is the whole point of it. So they've got quite a lot of work to do, but yeah, I would love to be able to say at the end of the 5 years, great, here's the water gate taken off the culvert, you make up your minds whether you stay or go.
Well, but I mean, I wish them the best of luck for sure. Excellent. That's all of our questions. So thank you very much. Unless anyone's got any final ones they want to pop on the chat, I think that's a wrap. So thank you.
You're very welcome. I think my email address maybe went in the chat. If anybody's got any other questions, or they want to see if they're interested in releasing beavers. So we're working with a number of organisations at the moment that have come to us and said, we'd like to release beavers. So, you know, we're sharing all our information with people, anyone that's interested in doing research. Again, you know, we're sharing all our information. We're not at all closed about this. We just want to you know, help as many people as possible. Or if you're interested in coming and seeing the beavers or doing a training session, then please get in touch. It'd be lovely to hear from you.
Excellent, thank you.
Gary and Helen have their hands up, their virtual hands up. If you could just type into the chat, or if it's a question or a comment, type it into the Q&A. Gary and Helen, if that's what you want to do.
In the meantime, yes, I think Kate's email address has gone into the chat function, and there's links to all the other bits and bobs that you've kind of spoken about during the presentation in there as well. So please go and have a look at those. Okay, no more questions. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time, Kate. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Kate for the really interesting talk, and for everyone who has attended on behalf of CIWEM, and for you, Katie, for organising this event as well in East Midlands branch. So well done. And as I said before, we were always interested in hearing how the beavers are doing in Derbyshire, and so perhaps that's another revisit next year.